of over 30 decades, which is 300 years, have not turned up anything to substantiate Abraham, Jacob, Samuel, David, all of these names. Archaeology of the past, and by the way, this book was written in 2000, just the other day, 2000. The year 2000, this book came out. And up to that point, he was saying archaeological findings of the land.
Blessed love, let me ask you, family, what's the age of your child or children? Do they attend public school and will be on summer break until September? Well, whatever the age or circumstance, we at the Priest Isaac Institute of Holistic Knowledge have great news for you. We will be conducting an online Universal Summer School Camp from Monday, mark the date, Monday the 7th of August to Friday the 25th day of August. Your child or children, no matter the age, will be engaged in various online activities that are enough fun, entertaining, and education. Outside of African history, astronomy, biology, and mathematics, which we will be doing, of course, your child or children will learn how to prepare a healthy meal with your supervision, for sure. They will learn the basics of the African language, Swahili, art, even how to start and conduct their own business. Hold on, there's more. Online yoga classes for the youth, field trips to sacred spaces, plus many guest speakers and teachers will join us throughout the Universal Summer School Camp. Enroll your young ones today. If they are up to it, they might even be a special guest co-host on a radio program on Radio Anu. Many people will be listening. Now listen to this. If you are currently or were previously a part of our international homeschool program, you pay nothing to be a part of the Universal Summer School Camp. In fact, if you enroll your young ones into our international homeschool program, that is our international homeschool program, a separate program all by itself, that is months worth of daily classes on different subject areas for your young ones. If you enroll your young ones in our international homeschool program before the 1st of August, your child or children will partake of the summer school camp free, of course. So family, what are we waiting for? This will definitely be a benefit for your youths. It will keep them occupied, plus we promise you convenience as it relates to your time. Do it for them. They will love it. We also have prizes available to be gained, tablets, books, etc. for the outstanding youths. There will even be a special tour of the Prime Minister's office here in the nation of Antigua and Barbuda. This is going to be a wonderful summer school camp, universal. So family, you know what to do. For more information, visit our website, priestisaacinstitute.com. That's priestisaacinstitute.com, or give us an email, priestisaacinstitute@gmail.com. Give thanks.
Thanks. Well,
2000, the year 2000, this book came out. And up to that point, he was saying archaeological findings of the last 300 years, taking us back down into the 17th, 18th century, have not turned up anything conclusive about these characters. I'll yield at this point and allow RASTA to make his input.
yes, give thanks. Well, how I would like to deal with that situation is that I agree that this writing is late, because what I didn't get to say, what I should have said before, is probably, they say, I mean, perhaps Archeoastronomy could confirm whether I'm right or wrong in saying it is believed that the earliest texts are around 800 BC. You know, the earliest biblical text being the book of Isaiah is said to date to around 800 BC. Would that be correct, Russ Adonis?
There are some writings that they point to, and they like to say that's when certain fuller compilations, they might find certain points of reference.
Okay.
But, you know, when something is first written, you know, we don't know. You know what I mean? The copy they find. Yes, you're correct.
Thanks. So that brings us back to what I came in with last week, the chronological model. So even if we're trying to base our history or our arguments on the chronological model, which is based on archaeology, there's nothing wrong with archaeology, but is their paradigm of dating correct? That is the question. The dated, when they dated to say whatever, the Bronze Age or the Iron Age or whatever, is it correct? Because that is their interpretation of the chronology, which I have got I did actually prepare something today to actually more substantiate what I was saying. But if it's 800 BC anyway, let's say that, I can tell you right now, there's been some evidence being found of the prophets in the Numbers. Balaam is a major prophet of Israel, and there's been archaeological evidence now where they're dating him to 1400 BC. So now, if we've got the earliest text being 800, and now we've found Balaam in 1400 BC, we're now seeing this error coming in it now, because this actually, if that is factually true, what they're saying with the archaeological evidence stands up that is 1400, well then that puts the whole paradigm out again. So that is one aspect, but I want to now bring it about where we also, the people who are writing the Bible, who is after 300 BC, let's give it the earliest, you know, after the Ptolemies, the translations being given and however it's gone through the next few centuries. If the earliest stage of the Bible being transcribed is into 300 BC, everything they're talking about is 1,400, if Abraham is 1700, is 1,400 years before. The time of Moses is 1,000 years before. So if there's no record, if there's no text record older than 800 BC, where do they get the idea of Abraham and Moses and David and all of these things being in that particular time frame? Around 1000 BC, you know, let's say from 1500 to 1000 BC. If we want it, we're talking about Israel, the foundation of Israel to the kingdom of David. If it takes that long, 500 years. I'm just giving general, I'm not getting specific, I'm just giving general timestamps. So what I want to say is, in the Bible, I always search for the Africanness of it. And in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 5, I think it's verse 1 or 2, it says, God created man, and God created Adam, man, and woman, obviously, and named them in the day in which they were born. Well, what does that mean? Have you, I don't know if anybody's ever considered that, because this is something I consider. Well, the only people who named their children in the day they were born is Ghanaian, well, not only Ghanaian people, because I've heard it in South Africa also, but I've only ever found the name for Sunday in South Africa. Somebody born on a Sunday, but in West Africa, if you're born on a Monday, you're Kojo. If you're born on a Tuesday, you're Kobina. You're Kwezi. Ya'a, all of the different names. Kofi. For the days in which the day you were born. AC, female, they have the male and female equivalent. So that is an African practice. That's written there in the Bible, that there is an African something going on. When they then come down to the time of Israel, when Joshua got into the land, and you hear about Achan having some, let's say they call him a thief, right? And he's something to do with the stealing out of the tents, But what is his gold? What is linked with Ghana? Gold. So we see I'm just talking generally. I'm not getting too deep into it, but we see the gold connection there with the Messiah. This thing here is coming with the Messiah. This is the origin of the Messiah link coming into the Bible there. So, but then this is the favorite one I have. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 13. I think it's 13, 12 or 13, is where Ezekiel, who is now supposedly in captivity in Babylon, which dates him up to post 560 BC. He's talking about the ancients of Israel. And he says, Ja'azania, Ja'azaniah. Ja'azania. Well, what does that mean, Ja'azania? Because he's looking through the wall, which is the southern wall, which is the white wall theology of Kemet. And he's looking through the wall and he's seeing the ancients of Israel. And he's talking about their abominable practices. Now, I don't want to go too deep into it, but there's a thing called a theophoric element. It is the suffix on the end of a word, like in El, like it is El, Mikael, Israel. El is the theophoric element, which gives the denotation. It's a denotation of the chosenness of God, right? And it is also, but what we can see in Azania, it is surrounded by the word Jah, J-A-H. We've got Jah, and then so we've got two, because it's two A's, J-A, Azania, and an H on the end. So it's surrounded by the word Jah. So obviously from that word, we can understand also, it's not only a suffix, it's a prefix. It's using the context of a prefix. Jah, Azania. So he's telling us in the Bible, in 560 BC, if their chronology is correct, or post 560 BC, I should say, because I'm not sure the date that they're saying that Ezekiel was in there, but it's the Babylonian exile when he's talking. So we have the ancients of Israel being described in the Bible as Azania, the chosen people of God. Azania. If we take the theophoric element, which denotes the chosenness of God, we have the chosen people of God in Azania. And just to bring it quite up to think, my dad was a priest, an African priest, and he used to say, and he used the quote, I can always remember him going to me, Saba Chatini, in his African voice. Saba Chatini, like when Christ was on the cross and he was calling for his ancestors, he was calling for God, and he's saying, Saba Chatini, right? Well, if you look at Saba Chatini, I can't remember what verse it's in the New Testament when Christ is being sacrificed. when he's on the cross, and he's saying this, but he's saying Saba, Ethiopia, Saba, Chathini. Well, that Thini is, if you look for that name Thini, you'll find it in South Africa, because even the king of South Africa right now has got that in his name. I can't remember, Jonathan Goodwill something Tinny, you know, I'd have to look it up what it is, but you understand me? But we bring in link, you know, I use these different elements to try to see what it is. So I'll leave that there, you know, but it's African as far as I can see, you know. And I mean, I can go a lot deeper, but we were having a discussion among, you know, we have to share this, you know. I'll give thanks.
Yes, family, let me come in there quick. Remember, we have a short night this evening. It's nice and spicy. I'd like to hear what Rasquam having his thought pattern, but you don't know, it's not going to be long now. I just kind of adding to the reasoning. Sure, I was listening to the reasoning, of course. So while I listening, I said, let me just pull up a few points. Since we're talking about archaeology, I don't know what the ones them think about the Hezekiah seal. I know we all would have had an idea of the Hezekiah seal. I remember a time, I don't know if I think Rasquam was there. It's about a good 6 years ago when we had that big theological reasoning up at Ras Freeman. About 300 Rasses were there. And the Bible was on trial. I think I was the moderator that day, somewhat similar to this. And I didn't really have a horse in the race, but I did pull up the same seal. I don't know if you remember Ras Ison. Ras Ison still there? And I asked, how authentic is it? So I'm pulling it up here again for the reasoning. This is just one of, you know, what many, of course, when it comes to archaeology, as scholars, we all know that it will always be debatable. Fair enough. So just pulling something on the table, as well as, since we were talking about maps, and actually, when Cypher Selassie started to go in deep, that Azania thing, I must say, that one is interesting. I don't know if the ones have come across the different maps from the 1800s, the 1700s. This is one from G.W. Colton. You have the maps of Ramsey. I have several of them in my folder. This one highlights, this is in Southern Africa, where it's highlighting Jerusalem. Some of them highlight, you know, a lot of biblical names, Bethany, maps that go back as far as the 1500s, AD now, not BC, AD. Because of course, you know, we're not just speaking to sound fantastic. We want to be clear with the scholarship here. So I just putting those two things on the table, just for the conversation's sake. All right, and then Rasquam,
I want to say something about the Hezekiah seal, because
anyone
that kind of thing would it go down to interpretation, because I see people who have the Hebrew orientation to put it up as a historical reference to validate the historical narrative of that. But then in a different perspective, it could also kind of, if first thing, I'm really sure if that Proto-Hebrew language, the Proto-Hebrew script was on the Hezekiah seal, if it's translatable or if it is being translated. But the symbology we're seeing fully. The symbology we're seeing on it, there's an ankh and a cherubim, you know what I mean, and a kepra as well. You know what I mean? So it come like if that to me it would more allude to like a heavy Kemetic influence, or like if these people was basically in a Kemetic religious concept now. Yes. So that would be kind of still leaning towards like what Ras Ison was bringing out, that it was like a literary tradition that get created to kind of create a backstory historically about a big kingdom and thing, but they get these ideas and thing out of the Kemetic soup of ideas now. So yeah.
True. What about the one that would say that disprove that not only Hezekiah is real, but that proves that they were really Africans?
And also, may I say this?
Yes, I'm going to take off this year, right? Yes, King, bless him.
All right, and thank you for presenting that, and perhaps you can get into a little bit more there. But what's interesting about that particular seal is from the biblical narrative. Yes, they did backdate things. I do agree with that. I mean, we all do. You know, we told about when we were little children. We don't remember none of it, but people keep telling us things, and that might become part of our story. But what's interesting about Hezekiah, in the narrative in Isaiah and in the scripts, Hezekiah was relying too much on politically, on Kemet or on Mitzrayim, on the Sematawi, whatever name you want to call it. Egypt, I would say there was no exodus from Egypt in the sense that Egypt was a term created later on by the Greeks. But that place that we know geographically, yes, things happen. But Hezekiah did rely on Egypt politically for support. He relied on Egypt, and the prophets were telling him that relying on Egypt is like, you know, like a man leaning on a wall and the wall is not strong enough, and your hand go to the wall and you get bit by a serpent, a snake. And what's so interesting is that Hezekiah, as one of our kings or the kings in the biblical tradition, was told, don't depend on political relationships with Egypt. And he did. And now that seal was seen to kind of suggest that, yes, he did look to Egypt for certain political and maybe religious leanings. And in that biblical narrative that was written, or one would say made up, it does reprove that. And it's just an interesting seal. The seal kind of backs up the biblical narrative in the sense that, why does he have an ankh on there and the Betuten Heru, the Betuten Heru with the wings stretched out and everything? Why does he have that? Huh? Yeah,
no, just repeating what you said. Betuten Heru, give thanks.
You know, why does he have that there? And it will show that he did rely politically, and what happened is it wasn't good for Israel. You know what I mean? In that sense. So there are political levels to the scripture, you know, as well. And that seal there, it does kind of, if it is authentic, I'm not saying it is, but if it is authentic, it's kind of interesting. It would back up that, wow, he did link with Egypt, and therefore it brings out a little more of a reality prior to the European Jews. So I do agree with Brother Isern, though he didn't say it's not just about race or people, whatever, but they do take a lot of things from the African traditions. But I'm saying that the original tradition that they have taken from was an African tradition that was an oral tradition, and it did have fragments of writing that they have co-opted for themselves in this modern times in the political way. It's a methodology of conspiracy, and I'm quoting the Honorable Priest Isaac right there, to look into this methodology of interpretation. You know, I give thanks. I might have to parachute.
I know that too.
Yeah.
And we will see up.
Brother Isern, I'd like to continue, and I hope you receive my, I would say, my bad if I did offend the eye, but for us to converse, hopefully in the forwards. And I'd like to follow up a little bit more on the questions. I thank you for the questions. They were thought-provoking questions. And the one by one was a good way to kind of go through it so that we can, you know, reason and come to overstanding. So no disrespect, my brother. Honorable. Yes, sir.
Blessed love, I am the Honorable Priest Isaac. I am an official priest within the realms of Rastafari of the Ethiopia Africa Black International Congress. I also hold a certification in the craft of Archeoastronomy from Politecnico di Milano in Italy. Our universe and its maker has always been an intriguing subject for humankind. Astronomy is the study of everything in the universe beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Ancient astronomy is similar, but pays special attention to the physical and spiritual values of stars, planets, moons, and other celestial objects. It also brings in the terrestrial component, being things on an earthly plane, such as plants, human organs, and connects them to the heavenly bodies. In this course, you will learn the makeup of various planets and stars, how to locate them in the night sky, along with their associated constellations. You will also be taught about the earliest civilizations known for their astronomical comprehension, namely Kush, also known as ancient Ethiopia, Kemet, called Egypt today, the Dogons, and the Bozos, as well as the civilization of Sumer. You will also learn about black holes, their nature and origin, as well as how the ancients viewed them. Ancient astronomy is the mother of archaeoastronomy and astrotheology. Both subject areas are covered by the Priest Isaac's Institute of Holistic Knowledge. Sign up today. Visit our website, priestisaacinstitute.com, or email us, priestisaacinstitute@gmail.com for more information.
I would say my bad if I did offend the eye, but for us to converse, hopefully in the forwards. And I'd like to follow up a little bit more on the questions. I thank you for the questions. They were thought-provoking questions. And the one by one was a good way to kind of go through it so that we can, reason and come to overstanding. So no disrespect, my brother. Honorable.
Respect,
yes,
likewise, big brother. Respect.
Yes, sir. Rastafari.
Give thanks, King, guidance to you. And we're going to parachute in a few minutes too. Maybe a little more, 10 minutes. But give thanks, and we will come over to your side and hear what's going on. Rastafari Israelites, family YouTube, Rastafari Israelites.
Yes, it's a quiet taste, but take a sip and maybe return and take another sip. Yes, sir.
Every night.
Very good work. Love the work, beloved. Honor and respect for that work you're doing, my beloved.
Pasquama, you want to? I've been waiting for to hear what you have to put in.
Yes, sir. Well, just taking on the topic. I'm still, of the view that
Israel not real.
According to the biblical narrative of a people that, came out of Egypt and, sojourned in the wilderness 40 years and, and then encountered a few wars before they could subdue that land of Israel. I still think that that have to do with legend more than its history or reality. As I said earlier, looking at archaeologists and what they have been doing, especially in that geographic area. Like take for instance, Neil Asher and Phil Gustin has been digging over in Jerusalem, and there's yet to discover a Solomon temple. They're yet to discover buildings that are of that nature that would suggest that you had an opulent society. You had a very rich culture back then. The evidence that are showcased that are coming out is that the people who are on that land are indigenous, or as Ison would say, are homegrown to that land. They see a continuity of culture, a development of culture, but there is no instance where a set of people came from anywhere else. To speak to the whole question of, there was a Israelite people, and they were also in contact with Egypt, as the brother just alluded to, Josiah, who more or less had contact with Egypt. You know what I mean?
Hezekiah, that was.
Hezekiah. Thanks for the correction. I mean, are there any Egyptian records? Are there any Mesopotamian records that would show, that would mention even like a David or a Solomon, or you know what I mean, something to that effect? We know of the Menata
Ethiopian record, brethren.
We know of the Menata
record.
Stele that speak to some victory over some Israel or something like that. But
can I interject something, Kwame?
But Selassie said some. Well, no, yeah, you seal up, Kwame. Sorry. But Cypher said something I didn't hear him properly. But you seal up.
But the greatest part of this culture that we haven't seen, you know what I mean? We haven't seen an honorable mention of a Solomon or a David coming out in these records or sources from neither Egypt nor Mesopotamia during that time.
Yes, it's a small fry.
Hezekiah, he's king.
No, I just don't know this. Okay.
Go to. Good point.
But just before you come, my son, King Cypher, you were saying something there when the king was speaking, like it sounded important.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no archaeology. You see, I'm challenging the whole chronological paradigm, which all of the history and science and everything is based on. Because the reason I think I can do that is because I've deciphered the Shabaka stone. In deciphering the Shabaka stone, I've got a completely different chronological paradigm, which
let me ask you a question though. I mean, even though you have a chronological paradigm, what does this have to do with physical material evidence that a specific community of people? You know, what does this have to do with the material that is absent?
If we were to change the paradigm, then we find a set of people. But guess where they are? They're the kings of Kemet. They're the Egyptian kings. Like, so David's kingdom, I put it back to 2450 BC.
It's true, yes.
I think the Davidic kingdom is 2450 BC. And then you find all the opulence, you find everything that sets up, and actually then also though, we find a Solomon, but then Solomon would be before that time, because Solomon is 3,000 odd years old.
So in other words, your paradigm is even suggesting that let's go back to an earlier reasoning that we had, because according to Ethiopians in the Kebranegas, the Solomonic dynasty is slated to begin around
957 BC.
957.
Well, it's actually 982. 982, because even though it says 957 is when Menelik I left the throne. He was on the throne for 25 years. That's what it goes back to 987. Right? 987 BC.
To me, I'm just, I'm going with what, like I said, the biblical narrative, because some of these stuff that you're purporting here has been done 25 years ago, around 25 years ago. I remember, I still do have that, because it's one of my favorite CD with Priest Isaac, the Biblical Land of Israel. He presented a superb, what I would call a geographic repositioning of the Biblical Land of Israel. So we know of this. We know of this, but what we're working with per se
can we verify it? That's what you want to know. Verify that there is another, the dating of the system. Well, if we use the astronomy, then we can verify it.
But would that impact whether or not that there is a building there? Yes or no? Okay. Maybe you're saying you're repositioning it.
The Solomonic Temple, beloved, is hidden in the Ethiopian king list, right? It's hidden in the Ethiopian king list, and it's a and it's hidden in that period coming down into 3,500 BC. But
I think,
and can I just, before we
go ahead. And then I come
because what I did do, I just wanted to, where we first came in, Rasaisan and brethren who were on the panel. I don't know if Rasta Kwame was here, but I was saying that
because I see your thought break there while I try to find the thought. Because as I was saying now, that program, those programs that we would have done, I was meditating to either replay them or we do some fresh ones, myself and yourself, so that even those on the panel can sit at home one night and just take in a lot of what you're putting out in a few minutes here, honestly. Because I could recall the conversation, so I can feed off a lot of what you're saying. But in reality, if a person not in tune with what you're saying, they might be saying, well, this man, they have enough maths, and how he could take the stars and chronologize when Solomon born. I would like to see this, because that's what you did. You went into the zodiac belt. Maybe a person has to see it, and then you brought it down. And it was, I would say, quite profound. How did I?
And may I say this? May I say this?
Yeah, it's still looking easy.
Yeah, I'm still there, just on a little overdrive here. Remember that the biblical narrative, speaks about something that the Babylonians had done, and they had razed the temple to the ground. They destroyed it, right? And so think about it for a moment. Ancient Egypt, many of the ancient things were never destroyed by outsider, never came in and did the same sort of things, like leveled, a temple or something to the ground, so forth and so on. My point is, how much archaeology do you expect to find from something that's testified to having been razed to the ground, to its very foundations? Are you following what I'm saying? That some things, for example, how much evidence will we find of 9/11 100 years from now? Yeah, they put up a memorial, but we won't find the actual building or the pieces of metal or so forth and so on that was in the damage, because that thing was actually all cleared and they built something else over it.
You will have eyewitness account that could, people who were there that can give you, an insight into what, happened at that time.
You're correct, my brother. But how long will that last unless somebody at some time write it down? Of course, we know it's written down now. We're all literate now to write, but not everybody in the ancient world necessarily was fully literate to write, say, a scroll like the priests in ancient Egypt, or like the biblical writers to write such a narrative, spinning historical facts, I believe, as well as mythological and interpretive things. That's how they communicate. I'm saying that it would have to be attested to by some writing. We all write today. We all have evidence today. I'm talking about in the ancient time. The evidence that we're looking at is from Egypt, monumental evidence, biblical evidence, them finding a piece of pottery, and making a big thing over it. And yet we have the Ethiopians testifying in the Kebra Nagast, and we know that there were earlier writings. I'm just saying, look at the tradition of passing on stories and then finally get written down. Most of our family history is not written down yet. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Most of our family history is just passed on by word of mouth until somebody, us or our children, decide this is so important, we're going to write it down. That's what I'm just talking about, that we have to question how much archaeology can we find if it existed and if it was razed to the ground, if it was destroyed. That's just why I want to just leave I and I on until we catch up again. I would love to catch the eyes and reasonings. I want to see the eyes full, uninterrupted perspective of things. I do agree with the item. I don't want the eye to think that we're carrying water for 740 AD Jews. We're not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, our lyrics king.
They stole.
Honorable priest. Sorry.
Yes, King, I said. And we can let's look to kind of round it up to land the plane. Yes, Rasta.
Yeah, because what I wanted to do, right? They have some from my book here, the original Torah.
I'm gonna get a copy of that. I'm getting a copy from my brother. Thank you. I'm gonna get a copy of it so I can be right out.
I want to read a couple of area that I highlighted, right? A couple of quotes from S. David Sperling. Let me read this one first. And this one is regarding Abraham, the personality of Father Abraham. And it's saying here, the systematic excavation of Israel since 1967 has shown that the Torah's account of the period preceding the rise of the first Israelite Commonwealth is completely unhistorical. Whereas the Torah devotes more than 4 books to the proposition that the Israelites came to Canaan after having been subjected in Egypt for generations, there is no archaeological evidence in Egyptian source that any element of late Israel were even in Egypt. In addition, a prolonged Egyptian stay should have left Egyptian elements in the material culture of the early Israelite settlement in Palestine, but there are none. I'm going to give another quote here now. After all, argued this guy called Well Hansen, even if a real patriarch named Abraham has existed in the 2nd millennium BC, no genuine record of him or his activities could have been preserved because literacy has not yet reached Syria, Palestine. When Wilhelmsen began writing, the potential of archaeology to contribute to biblical interpretation had barely been glimpsed. Accordingly, in 1878, there was nothing unusual about making an unverified statement about the extent of literacy in the 2nd pre-Christian millennium. Another quote here, and this one is concerning Albright, right? It's saying now the biblical archaeology movement, whose most renowned figure were W.F. Albright and G.E. Wright in the United States, and also this guy called Yegel Yedin in Israel, enthusiastically attempt to synthesize the Torah's tradition, the data concerning the 2nd millennium, freshly recovered from the Middle East. In other words, what is Brethren say, right? When the archaeological movement started, the approach that they used was not to analyze the archaeological findings with an independent mindset. They seek to see how everything that they discover could fit into the biblical narrative. And this was also a point that Finkelstein made. Because when you approach the same archaeological evidence with an independent mind, not trying to validate the biblical representation of things, you find that you will come to very different conclusions. And you will see very clearly that these archaeological findings really does not support these different things that are being claimed by the Jewish tradition. And that will connect with that same seal that priest Isaac referenced for Hezekiah. Because a point here is that during the 13th century BC, according to an archaeological excavation done by Finkelstein and Neil Asherman, they found that when they dig down at some site at present-day Israel, that they date back to around the 13th century BC, that whole area called the Middle Eastern area was basically part of the Egyptian province. They find artifacts and hieroglyphs and so on on walls, right there at the present location of Israel. So they're saying now, when you consider the Exodus story is based on our present geographic that place the borderline of Egypt according to what we know today. But back in the 13th century, the boundaries encompass the whole of what we call Middle East. And it makes sense because when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, he gained control over that same Middle Eastern area. Then the Romans overthrew the Greeks, and they also controlled that same Middle Eastern area. And it was during that time that the Ottoman Turks attacked Constantinople, where they bore a hole in the wall in 1453, and they brought down the Byzantine Empire. And then later on, I think in 1928, the League of Nations gave the British government who defeat the Ottoman Turks a mandate over that Middle Eastern area. And then was when they created Iraq, Iran, Jordan, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth. You see? So it's very important to observe this. We need to approach this biblical information from the mindset that these people really wrote themselves into history. If we approach it that way, just for the sake of balance, then we will find a lot of answer to the inconsistencies that is showing up in terms of the chronological records and so forth, because they actually wrote themselves as a people into history. And adapting information from people who exist back into ancient time and to use that to place themselves into antiquity. I would yield at this point.
But with that, you know, we're going to have to really, I can give everyone a last word, man, no Fred, but we have to really look to kind of seal it up. That's what's Kwame.
Yes, okay, sealing up. But just to build upon what Wes Eisen just said, I would like to touch a quote from the Bible on Earth, of course, Silverman and Finkelstein, that speak to their perspective on a historical Abraham or whatever. It says here, the historical saga contained in the Bible from Abraham's encounter with God and his journey to Canaan, to Moses' deliverance of the children of Israel from bondage, to the rise and fall of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, was not a miraculous revelation, but a brilliant product of human imagination. Just you know, I'm just leaving the eye on them on that point. And of course, it's always a pleasure to be here reading with the ones and ones.
I'm again the wall here with the time. You don't know. King Cypher and Co. Madrid, any words?
Yes, please, beloved. Because I would like to keep a consistent thread running through these programs that we're dealing with. And where I came in last week and we started getting into arguments, I'm saying, please, like, I'm just trying to lay a foundation, because I said then that all Western chronology is based on the interpretation of the Egyptian tombs, you know, where they've dug up the tombs of the viziers, of the kings, the pharaohs, and then they've dated them, right? Now, I brought that out of the David Roll, the Test of Time. Okay, that's where I read a little excerpt out of there. And I want to just finish it. I'm glad I could just finish this quickly here, where now I'm dealing with the Book of the Beginnings, Volume 1, Gerald Massey, right? Now he's the same. He's a 19th century philosopher, historian. He's a brilliant man, and he's not a racist either, right? And he talks about, you know, in all of his work, he's showing the African origin of all civilization. But I want to just, concerning chronology. Now, the Egyptian chronology, they're telling us, began at 3100 BC with the Menes or Mena, the Scorpion King, right? Here, on page 38 of the Book of the Beginnings of Gerald Massey, he's talking about the same Menes or the Mena or whatever, the same beginning of, I'll just read his words. It's only a little thing. He says, Egyptian monumental history begins with the name of Mena or Menes. The chronology made out by different Egyptologists is variously recorded thus, right? So this is Bunsen. He's got Menes to begin in 3623 BC. Right now, the given chronology is 3100 BC, right? Bunsen says it's 3623 BC. Lepsius, these are German, by the way, these people, 3892 BC. That is the time in the Ethiopian king list of Nimrod. Lorth, 4157 BC. This is the same beginning of
the unification
chronology. Brooks, 4455 BC. Very interesting. The Ethiopian king list says 4470 BC, right? Bunga, 5613 BC. Very interesting again, because the Ethiopian king list has been running, when it gives us the date of 4470, it's been running for 1030 years. Right, so add 4,470 to that gives us roughly 5,600 years, right? And we've got Unger giving 5,613 years. And then we've got Boek giving 5,702 years. Okay, so the foundation of all of this chronology is based on Egypt, and now we've got a 2,000 year reign gap between these different people studying these chronologies. Very interesting. But
I think even Budge and Gardner and Faulkner, I think they all, Flinders, Pitre, all of them have some slight difference even in their chronology too.
Yes.
But so all of us, even those of us who are, I noticed all the quote unquote Egyptian Kemetic scholars, we do stick to that timeline.
Yeah, well, I don't.
We just like, I don't know, it's just mystic. We all say the pyramid was built 2600 and something BCE. You know, I just say, wow. But anyway, I'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, well, I'll leave it there because I just wanted to get that in so we can, because I don't want to lose this thread. I want to keep
when we come again, we're going to. And as I say, I have a bigger thing planned, you know, a bigger day plan. Don't worry. Really sit down and we have to bring slides and everything.
Yes.
Yes, any, let me see, Rasa, you're still with us. Even before, I don't want to open no more so-called can of worms, you know. I said, since we were discussing the whole Canaanite people, and so I said, let me just push this one up on the conversation table too. Ones would know that even the whole concept of El, many ones consider, again, this is a whole can of worm, we might leave this for next week, but many consider that the El really was from the Canaanite people.
Yes, I
really is adopted it. Okay, yeah, so, and if you notice, Mr. El Hazana had like Asar, the Osiris hat for sure.
Yes, I.
But again, just putting something on the table for discussion. I don't we can handle that tonight.
Let me show the people in this book again.
And was that the early history of God? I hear you.
Looking at, it's focusing on Yahweh and the other deities of ancient Israel. You see, so the ISA.
Them discussions is to sharpen people, so there.
Yes, I.
Nobody's supposed to, even the listeners, nobody's supposed to leave here saying, boy, them man, what them man? You know the amount of things that say here tonight. I have time to worry about them man. The amount of knowledge I don't gain. Rastafari. Yes, anyone else? Choking.
I just want to just leave like a parting question.
Oh Lord.
Isn't it ironic, right? That the culture, the Hebrew culture, the Jewish culture seem to be more, how should I put it, more authoritative than even the Egyptian and African. Just think about that. In world history, the Jewish culture is much more dominant than all of our cultural, African culture representation.
Because the Western world is predicated on it. You know, this financial system of the Western world is predicated on that same paradigm. So that's where we have to get into. That's why when we have a different paradigm, we can.
But good question. Good question.
I still kind of want to disagree a little bit because to me, what I see is the world paradigm still on the Kemetic thing, because in all the power centers, they are the obelisk, and all on the American dollar, the American empire had the pyramid and certain thing on it. So they're still leaning from them thing, you know.
And also, but I think he's talking about in the open, like
no, he's right. He's right, but also that is looking at the Hebrew culture as not being an African culture, but the language Hebrew is Afro-Semitic, not Semito-African or Afro. So I think it's also discluding that the Hebrew culture is an African culture, even with the El and Kemet and El and the Canaanites. You know what I'm saying? So I think we're looking at a dispute among African peoples, and this Jewish culture, Hebrew, has been adopted by Europeans and kind of retooled politically, as a brother made in looking at the history, bringing it up to the Ottomans, the UN, and the establishment of the so-called State of Israel.
One thing I want to say too. Let me come in there. Last week program, right? I noticed there was a point made. No, we didn't really feed on it. We kind of push it aside, and that was when apparently, I don't remember who quoted it, Haile Selassie made a distinction between I'm going to use the term Jewish culture and the Zionism. Yeah, but we didn't feed on that point. I think that's a good point. Maybe one of these times we go into a little deeper. It might also clear up a lot of things.
I would just like to say finally, right? What I try to caution myself against doing is to use the brand name that was created by the European Jews in Hebrew and Jewish and Christianity, to use it and say that it is African. I don't want to embrace it under that brand name, because what they actually did is to take cultural element out of Africa and rebrand it.
Yes.
You understand? So I don't want to say that Hebrew, even though the language carries Afro element, I would not want to call it African, because it's like I am kind of bigging up, in a sense, the Hebrew and Jewish tradition. When that particular brand was created by the European using African cultural elements.
And this was true because Dr. Henry Clark spoke about that, you know, when he was speaking about the whole aspect of Constantine and so on during the time of the Council of Nicaea. And he was saying that, in a nutshell, is that when the theology changed from an African perspective to a European perspective, when they started to acknowledge the literal interpretation of Jesus the Christ. And that's a very important thing to look at. I do have the video here with him talking about it. So anybody want to see it, you can get a chance to look at it. But it's interesting that he's saying that the Europeans, the change that they brought to the theology of the Christ was that they started to look at him, the Christ, in human form. You see what I'm saying? So that speaks to something else, that before that, prior to that, you know, Christ was not a physical human. He was not a human being.
Concept.
So he did say the physical concept of Jesus Christ.
Well, how does His Majesty fit into there?
And I think that was changed at the conference of Ephesus, and